You're listening to Keith Engle, the host of TGI Sports Talk on the National Streaming Sports Roku channel.
Good morning, everybody. Keith Engle here for TGI Sports Talks 101 with Keith Engle. I'll bring my guest in just a few minutes. Gary McKillips, who's the host of a podcast, Sports Across the Board, which you can catch, and we'll talk to Gary about how we can see those episodes and previous episodes, and talk a little bit about what he's done in the past. And Gary, what a great voice for real. But I was listening to some of his interviews the other day. He's got the best radio voice ever, and we're going to talk about the fact that he's covered pretty much every major sporting event in his country, every major sport in general. He also was the play-by-play announcer for the Glove City Colonials back in the 70s when I was going to watch these games in upstate New York, Johnstown, New York, specifically at Knox Field. Some great friends of mine played on that team and are in the Semi-Pro Hall of Fame. So we'll be talking about some of that and his memories of upstate New York, good and bad, I guess. And Gary's done some other stuff. He's semi-retired, as he just told me, but I know he does some stuff for AP Radio, some blogging, and we'll talk to him about everything that he's done. He's had a great, varied career in the sports world, both kind of in front of on the front lines and kind of behind the scenes. And we'll get into all of that with Gary in just a second. Want to welcome all of you watching today on our TGI Sports Talk Facebook feed, our YouTube feed. We're live on National Streaming Sports Roku channel. Get those channels downloaded, guys. All you need is the Roku app or smart TV and download the National Streaming Sports channel, and you can watch my giant head on a bigger screen. And DDH, thumbs up to you. Hope you're watching down on us today. Couple quick shout outs. Ralph Williams at RW Media in Pittsburgh. Ralph does some great stuff there, specifically the sports corner that he does every Tuesday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern with Smoke and Jim Frazier. I've been a guest there a few times and had a lot of fun with those guys. And some of the groups that, there's hundreds of groups I share this to, as you know, and we end up with thousands of views because of that, plus our live viewers. Specifically John Gonzalez at the Sports Authorities, Flo and the gang at Bottom Line Sports, Tanner D over at LTS, Let's Talk Sports, and of course Ken Krause at Golf Bud Sports and More, Sports of All Sorts, sorry. And we appreciate all of that. And also don't forget to check out Bet Us. They're a partial sponsor of National Streaming Sports. You can go to the Northeast Streaming Sports site, nessp.gov, .net, and you can click the link for Bet Us. Bet responsibly, though, guys. Very important to bet with your head, not over it, right? In any event, I'm going to bring in my guest right now, Mr. Gary McKillips. Oh, Gary has gone dark on me. How come? What happened, Gary? Gary kind of disappeared. Might be back in a second. So anyway, we'll talk to Gary about how he got interested in sports and how he got into the fields that he got into at University of Tennessee and Georgia State, Turner Broadcasting. Did a lot of different stuff. We lost Gary at the last second here. Or maybe he bailed out. Maybe he said, Jesus, I can't do this. I felt that. Who's with us this morning so far? Rick Sherlock's with us. Dave Guyette's with us. Good morning, Rick. Looks like Gary's back now. Rick Sherlock, former Glove City Colonial Rick Sherlock. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Keith?
Very good. I don't know what happened there. I brought you in and we had a black screen.
I don't know what happened either, but fortunately, we're back. So,
and Alex Simpson's with us this morning. To show you the reach of this show, Gary, Alex Simpson is one of our many, many viewers over in the UK. So we've got lots of viewers all over the place. And Rick Sherlock right up in Amsterdam, New York, which you're probably familiar with from your time here in the Northeast.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Jerry, I said I listened to your some of your podcasts this past week, and the voice is perfect, man. You got the radio voice. Did you always have? I mean, when you were a kid, did you want to go into radio and sports in general? What was the impetus for you going the direction you went in your career?
I guess I did. I had one of these baseball games, one of these table games, and it was APBA, There were several of them out there, Gamco, and there were a couple of others. But I played these games and then started broadcasting the game as it went along. And then my cousin and I also, we'd listen to Browns games because I grew up in Cleveland, or Indians games, but particularly Browns games. And I kind of followed the play-by-play and do my own play-by-play, and he'd be the color guy. What was funny is we lived in Cleveland on Clifton Boulevard, and we did this on the front porch. Well, sometimes the Browns would play on the West Coast, and we started around 10:30, 11 o'clock. Well, my grandmother was very concerned about the neighbors. So when we would get a little too loud, she would come out with her whisk broom and start beating us over the head to quiet down. But that's how I kind of got into this.
That's very interesting. I kind of did the same thing myself with Stratomatic, and was AB the one you mentioned? Too many letters, I guess, for me to remember. Was that the one with the spin dial and the cards with the different size things, or no? Not, you remember?
Dice.
Yeah, okay.
And I think it was 3 columns of numbers, and
yeah,
it was
that's
good.
similar.
And,
yeah. It's interesting. We do things. Obviously, my career didn't go that way until I started doing this, and never did play-by-play. That would have been a fun thing to do for me at the time. I'm glad it went that way for you. Did you grew up? Your entire young life was in Cleveland?
Yeah, I stayed there. Well, I also went to college there. Went to John Carroll University. Okay. Went to St. Ed's High School, which is now huge in terms of football. Then I went to the Army. So I spent 3 years in the Army. Went to Vietnam for a year. Came back in 1970, late 1971. So, and that's when I moved to upstate New York.
So, well, thank you for your service. It's interesting because I mentioned Gary and I have been Facebook friends for quite a while, since I can remember, but never really interacted. And he put this post up. He mentions upstate New York. He puts a post up a couple of weeks ago about WIZR, and I'm like, how can this guy in Atlanta, Georgia, who I see with all these great famous athletes, not taking nothing away from you former Colonials, by the way, been at WIZR? So I reached out to Gary, and you have covered, as I said in my opening, you've covered every major sport. You've probably covered the championships of every major sports. I've seen you interviewing basically any superstar at a sport I could think of almost. How does that all compare with your time in upstate New York for 10 years or so? The 70s, I think you mentioned you covered, did sports on WIZR, including the Glove City Colonials. And I read on your bio, I think 500 games overall. Were you doing high school and other sports?
We did everything at WIZR. The station manager was Dick Street, and he was big into sports, and he was also big into making money. And every sporting event he would sell out. So we did all the Johnstown High School games, some Gloversville games, even a few Fulton Montgomery Community College games. And that's how I accumulated so many games, because we were doing, we were on the air constantly, and that's football and basketball. Yeah. Then we would sell out other things like golf. Let's see, what else? Skating, we had that. We even had dog racing once. Now that's a challenge to do 4 hours from a dog race. They meant it to be like the Iditarod, but it was a little shorter. So anyway.
There's a lot of time to fill because the races are about 30 seconds long, aren't they?
Right. So you had to talk to the muckers or whatever they called them. And then when things got really bad, you just put the mic down and let the dogs bark a little bit. So anyway. It was interesting, but like I said, he'd sell anything.
What? So you were in, Ohio's a little. I haven't spent any great time in Ohio, but it seems like the rural areas are a bit like upstate New York. You can speak to that. So it wasn't a big culture change. I mean, what was it? Just the fact I need a job out of getting back from Vietnam, and again, if you didn't hear me, thank you for your service for that. Is that what brought you here? Just the fact this is a job, or did you have some attraction to the Northeast, or staying fairly more local?
Well, I started in Vietnam. I started running ads in various publications, one of which was editor and publisher. And I guess that's still in existence. But anyway, the telephone company in upstate New York saw my ad, and they asked me if I'd be interested, and they were the best offer, believe it or not. It was a company called General Telephone. And so I went to work for them in public relations. And actually, I've had kind of a dual career, PR and sports.
Yeah.
And so, I guess like you're doing, we both seem to be doing a lot of things. But anyway, it was fortuitous because I had this opportunity. I heard that the local station was looking for somebody to do sports. So boom, I went over there, and that's how we started and kept going for 10 years. Now, the other interesting thing about Johnstown was there's quite a rivalry between the two stations. WENT was the Yankee station, as you know.
Yeah.
And we were the Mets station. So first of all, that gave me a lot of access to Mets players because we'd have affiliates days, and you could pretty much go down there whenever you wanted to. But there was quite a rivalry. And speaking of Colonials, it was like the Colonials were huge. They were huge. They were the biggest thing probably in that entire Capital District, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so both stations wanted to cover the Colonials. And I think we started out, and I think both did. Well, I'm not sure. But anyway, there was a bidding war, believe it or not, for the rights to do the Colonial games. And we won that bidding war. So I wound up doing it for like 5 or 6 years. And then I think after that, ENT may have gotten it. But anyway, it was quite a deal.
Yeah, I never heard the games on the radios, which is probably why it never clicked, because we were at the games all the time and we traveled to the away games. And because I said I had a lot of friends that played there and played for them, played very well, as I mentioned. You have fond memories of being in upstate New York?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we were just talking earlier about the fall and how beautiful it is. Because of the association with the radio station, I covered Saratoga every so often, and actually had an opportunity to see Secretariat. And this was the year that he won the Triple Crown, and there was great anticipation. This was the Whitney Stakes.
Travers. Was it Travers? Oh, no, it was a Whitney. I think you're right. Yeah.
Where he wound up losing to a horse named Onion. But the interesting thing about that is I had arranged for the credentials, got up to Saratoga, no credential. So I had to talk my way through the first gate, basically, got upstairs to the press box, and I talked to someone up there, and I convinced them that I really needed to be here. And he said, okay, well, there's no seats, but you can stay here. So I looked around, and there was an empty seat. So I went and sat down, and the nameplate said Win Elliott, who was a great announcer for CBS and covered all these major races. So I was sitting in Win Elliott's seat as Secretariat was defeated. But
that's interesting. Saratoga, where I live now, is about 15 minutes from south. I live in Half Moon, which is around Clifton Park, which you would not recognize probably from your days in the 70s. If you ever came to the Clifton Park area, it was all farmland. Now it's all homes and developments, and it's a beautiful, beautiful area. It's about halfway between Saratoga and Albany. So I know you probably must have traveled through a lot of this area when you're covering the Glove City Colonials, because they were playing in, Hudson Falls and Albany, and where Messina, you mentioned, I think.
Let me see here. I have a schedule, but they played in places like Messina, Watertown.
Yeah.
Boy, I'll tell you. Okay, here we go. Albany, obviously. They played the Mid-State Mustangs in Herkimer. I used to do high school basketball in Herkimer when the Johnstown team would go there. They played in Binghamton, Rochester, and of course Messina. So, they got all over the state. Now, we always had some interesting happenings on these away trips. Yeah. And once we went up to Watertown, and we stayed at the Holiday Inn in Watertown. It's a very nice hotel. And the way this worked, there wasn't a bus. Everybody just drove on their own, basically.
Right.
Put the gear in and went up there. And then I would drive. Sometimes I'd take my color man. Sometimes I'd just drive up there on my own. But anyway, so we got there, and we stayed the night after the game. And I think we won that game against Watertown. Watertown Red and Black was their name. And there was a barber shop at the top of the hotel. Now, why there was a barber shop up there, I have no idea. But so as the evening went on, there were a group of Colonials around, and we were all kind of talking. And all of a sudden, they noticed that Doogie Aguilera was missing. And Doogie was I believe he was a lineman, but he was very prominent with the Colonials. Anyway, so there was the barber shop, as I said, up at the top.
Yeah.
And we were all talking, where's Doogie? Where's Doogie? And all of a sudden, the elevator door opens, and there's this guy with a cigar sitting on a barber chair. And that was Doogie. So somehow they managed to dislodge the barber chair and bring it down. I can't remember how much damage they had to pay for. But
yeah, there was an interesting group of guys that played there. The time that I know best was mid to late 70s, because I'm a little bit, yeah, and you guys have been probably the same age as a lot of those guys that were playing when you got started, I would think. A lot of college guys would play and then have to go back to college. If I remember right, let me start there. If I remember right, the Colonials always would have a really good team and then kind of fade towards playoff time because a lot of the college kids had to go back to school. Same way you remember that?
I do. I think that's one of the reasons why they only won one championship when I was there, and that was 1974.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had quite a few. Actually, they had quite a few regulars who would hang around. I mean, one of the more famous is Bobby Bean, and he was let's see,
good quarterback. Sure.
This was our quarterback. This is a Colonial program from, let's see what year it was. It was 1979. Bob Bean was the quarterback. He quarterbacked for about 10 years.
Yeah, I remember.
And as this says, he was picked by Pro Football Weekly as the nation's top Class A signal caller for 1978. So he was quite good. We did a real strong team back in those days.
Yeah, we talked about Joe Hall earlier, and I believe Joe and Bob Bean went into the Semi-Pro Football Hall of Fame together. Yeah. Sadly, it was shortly after Bob passed away. He had a battle with cancer in 2016.
Yeah, I know. I just saw that. So,
but good guy, and they've got. I mean, there's a lot of guys from that era that I know of, and I'm sure from other eras that made the Hall of Fame. Harry Robinson played a long time. Some of these names you may remember and may not. Bobby Sherlock, I mentioned. John Doviak, Joe Hall, who, by the way, created quite a stir when he decided to go play for the Maulers one year. Him and Salvataglia, I remember both going there. Billy Hall, I remember very well. John Doviak, maybe I mentioned Rick Sager. Mike Malatino, I know, was a Hall of Famer as well.
Yeah. He was a defensive back.
Yeah. Any of those people that, because these were all crazy guys, most of them, as you mentioned, with the barber chair. In their younger days, they were crazy.
Absolutely, yeah. No, Joe Hall, I'll tell you, he was a talent. He was really good, and I called him Jumping Joe Hall, and he would, he'd pick off 50 yards occasionally. He had games of close to 100 or over 100 sometimes, and he was just a joy to watch. So that was one of the better teams when he was around. For several years, actually.
I think Joe's about 6 years older than me, so I think he's 70, and he looks like he could play today. He looks great. He could go out there and probably give some of these kids a run for their money. Don Benton is a coach. Don Benton and Frank Mayfield. Frank Mayfield probably might have played. Did he play play at all when you were there? You would have been quarterback, I think. But then he became coach after Don Benton. Don Benton was there a long time. You probably remember him, Rick.
Absolutely.
Rick Sherlock wanted to make sure I brought up to you. He wanted to know how many conversations you had with Don Benton where there weren't F-bombs like every other word.
He was a classic coach, I'll tell you. He coached for, 7-8 years. Then he quit for a year, and then he came back and coached again. But, he was the best one they had. Another thing about the Colonials, and this was before I got there, but they had a 26-game winning streak, which I think was finally snapped by, I believe it might have been Watertown. But even before I got there, and I guess in the late 60s, early 70s, they were a formidable team.
Yeah, again, it was great football. The entire Empire Football League, and it seemed like semi-pro football was, and you may have a better take on this than I do. It was a bigger. There was more of these leagues across the country than there are today, and the football was actually better. Talent-wise, and the way the game was played. What happened? What do you suppose happened to that segment of semi-pro sports?
I don't know. I think now there's so much more access to football on television, where before, back when I was there, we had the 3 channels, maybe 4, and we were actually televising the Colonial games. We were the first to do that. There was a cable TV station that started in Johnstown or Gloversville, so we televised a few games, and that was remarkable back in the day. But there's so much more now, I think, available that, you got to go down and watch the games on a Saturday night when you can see a big college football game or whatever.
That's a great point.
The talent was great and the games were exciting. So I know Knox Stadium, they say it's 25 capacity, but I'm sure they had more than that because it was filled to the rafters, and there were berms along the way that people could sit on. So I'll tell you another story about what happened at Knox Stadium. WENT decided to do something different. Like I said, there was a lot of competition between the 2 stations.
Yeah.
ENT decided, why don't we get a airplane to cover traffic? Instead of a traffic copter, a traffic plane. So,
go fast.
We'll go up for about 10 minutes, and that's the rush hour. So anyway, but this pilot was a little wacky. So one night, I think it may have been during the Leather Bowl, but anyway, he decided to buzz Knox Stadium, and so he came way low and zoomed past, and this was not good. He unfortunately had his license taken away, I think, after that, but it was a crazy moment.
Did you? That sounds hilarious, actually. You mentioned too that, and I don't remember this until you had posted the picture with Johnny Unitas, that there were events that brought some of these big stars in, and they would actually be your color man for the night. What prompted that? What was the promotion or whatever that brought them into town, and what was it like to be? That was probably your first. Well, you said you did some Mets interviews and whatnot, being the Met affiliate, but I mean, Johnny Unitas there's nobody bigger than Johnny Unitas in the 70s, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, there was a tannery in Johnstown, and the tannery would smell. The odor in South Johnstown was not good, but the tannery was very important to the economic life of the city. So everybody put up with it. But the owner, a guy by the name of Fred Rulison, who actually is in this picture. I don't know if you can see it. The guy, there we go. The guy, you can see Unitas there.
I can.
The guy on my right is Fred Rulison.
Oh, you're the guy in the middle.
Yeah, I'm the guy in the middle. Believe it or not. How do you like that sport coat?
I love that checkered sport coat. That was awesome. I love that. Good luck.
So anyway, he decided he would make up for it, and he would bring in these stars, sports stars. And one time he brought in an entire group of Yankees. Yogi was there. Billy Martin was there. Whitey Ford was there. I mean, it was unbelievable. I have a picture of my son. I took him to the banquet they had, and he was like his mouth was wide open as he was looking at all these people. But anyway, so that's how a lot of these people came into town, and he did it again with another group. I can't remember who it was, but there were stars floating through Johnstown all the time. Dave Jennings, who was a punter for the New York Giants back in the day, he was there for a speaking engagement. Anytime any of these guys would show up, I would jump on it and do the interviews. Tell you another story. Joe Garagiola was of course, he did everything. He was on the NBC Game of the Week. He former catcher. He was a funny guy.
Did the dog show, for crying out loud. He covered everything. He did the dog show. Yeah.
Yeah. Today Show, everything.
Did everything.
Anyway, so I was in the car. We went to the Albany airport, and I was in the car with Yogi, Joe, myself, and the driver. And I wanted to do my interview with Joe. So Yogi wasn't saying much at all. He was just sitting there. And so I interviewed Joe, and we got to Johnstown, and there were hundreds of people. I mean, maybe 1,000 people waiting for this caravan coming in. And Joe said, how'd it go? I said, oh, fine, no problem. And he said, are you sure that tape is going to be good? There might be some road noise or something. So I checked it, and I said, sure enough, there was. But I wasn't going to say, let's redo it, because, I was intimidated by all these guys. So anyway, he said, oh, wait a minute. Let's stay right here, and you redo this tape. And I'll tell you, that was a great lesson for me because, never sacrifice quality for whatever. And, I know that he was such a great guy as a public figure, where a lot of guys would just blow it off and that's it. So that's my story about Joe.
Rick brings up, it must have been talking about the tanning company, the Leather Bowl. I'm not sure. I don't know if the Leather Bowl was maybe that was a Gloversville Johnstown rivalry. I don't know. Rick maybe can give us some more information, but Rick was also he was one of those Colonials that we talked about. Rick played from the mid 70s and late 80s. He was talking about, speaking of destroying property, they had an away game where they sank a paddle boat and swam to shore, and that ended their hotel stays.
That's a good one. Yeah. That is a good one. Yeah.
A bunch of those. My God, those guys were nuts. I don't recall. Was there anybody who really? I mean, if somebody was gonna make it to a bigger stage, I mean, somebody like Joe Hall would have been the guy that I would have thought would have. Do you remember anybody from the Empire Football League that really moved on to better things?
Some of them did get a look by some of the pro teams, and I think Joe may have.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I'm not sure. I mean, they had some really good, talented people, but it was tough. I think some of them might have given it a try as a walk-on, but none of them really made it into the pros that I can recall, anyhow. So, but Joe was close.
So yourself, spending 10 years in it's not a major media market, obviously. Was great for us. I mean, it's funny. I grew up in Perth, which I think I told you it's about, I don't know, 50, you might know the area. It's 15 minutes from Johnstown and Gloversville both, 20 minutes. And for us, I mean, Johnstown, Gloversville, Amsterdam, those were the big cities. My wife grew up on Long Island, and like on a Sunday, I'll go watch football with some of my friends in Amsterdam. And she'll say, where are you off to? And I said, I'm going to the city, and she's thinking, the city? That's New York, not Amsterdam. Yeah. But it's the city to me. So these were big cities for us. But you must have had aspirations to move on, and you spent quite a bit of time in Johnstown. Did you have opportunities to leave? I know we talked about your varied career. Was the idea to maybe move on to a major market and get to one of the networks, or were there other plans for Gary?
I thought about it, but back in the day, I had one child, three by the time we left Johnstown. Yeah. And I don't know, I came from a family where having permanent employment was a huge deal. And I know back then, there were only 3 TV stations who had an anchor. You had no sports talk stations. So your opportunities were limited, and the pay wasn't very good, as it is. It's not very good now, but still, unless you're really at the upper echelon.
Right.
So I decided, I guess I'd better just keep doing this PR gig, which worked out very well because I eventually moved to our region in St. Louis, and then I became a corporate officer in Atlanta with a company called Contel at that point after a merger. So that worked out real well, but I was able to keep my passion going all along, which, has now resulted in my continuing to do this stuff full time almost after being retired. So it worked out okay, but yeah, I gave it some thought and probably could have worked at some, in some places, but who knows? So I'm happy with what happened.
When you did move on, I guess 80-ish, you move around there, 80. So then I know you were, I don't know the order of what you were at. I mean, you were at Georgia State, and kind of behind the scenes in the as you mentioned, PR and that type of thing. Georgia State, University of Tennessee, Turner Broadcasting. Tell us a little bit about that road for Gary, and how you kind of balanced still your passion with working in the real world, if you will, I guess. Not that that's work, sportscasting.
Well, when I moved to St. Louis, I didn't do much radio, but I did do writing for the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, which no longer exists. So I did do freelance writing there and a lot of interesting stories. Had a great interview with a guy named Davey Phillips, who was the umpire, and he was the umpire in the Pine Tar game.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Anyway, so I went from there to, I went to Atlanta, and at first didn't do much here. And then, I was only there about a year or so, and the merger took place with Contel being acquired by Verizon or whoever. So I went to work at Turner Broadcasting then. And that was like the blend of both worlds, because I was doing corporate and sports PR. And I was the spokesperson for Ted Turner often, the Goodwill games, and promoted the on-air talent, such as Skip Carey and people like that who actually broadcast the games. So it's kind of a nice melding of sports, corporate, PR, the whole works. But once again, the bug, the merger bug came along, and Time Warner acquired Turner, and they let us all go in Atlanta because the corporate headquarters was in New York. So anyway, then I got an offer from University of Tennessee, and I was kind of sick of corporate anyhow. And Tennessee had Peyton Manning playing there, the Big Orange. I mean, it's huge. I mean, to this day, in fact, online, somebody did an artist rendering of what would it take to put 1 million people in Neyland Stadium, and it showed how the seating could be configured. Anyway, so I went there and just enjoyed that. The second year we won the national championship. T. Martin was the quarterback. One of the highlights of that was going to the White House the following year.
Cool.
And meeting President Clinton and Gore and the whole schmack. So it was great. And I coordinated the PR on that too, which was rather interesting. After that, so I where was I? Left Turner, then went to Tennessee, and then the Tennessee thing, I didn't get along with the new president, so I decided, screw it. Plus, I wanted to get back to Atlanta because my wife and I were living in separate places for a few years, and that became quite old. I was commuting on the weekends. It just didn't work out well. So I went to work at Georgia State, and after about a year there, I got a call from actually the guy who was the play-by-play guy for Georgia State. Told me that they were looking for somebody in Atlanta. The AP was looking for somebody in Atlanta. And lo and behold, I called Dave Lebesky up there, and we talked about it, and boom, the next thing you know, I was doing the playoffs, which was 2004 when the Braves were in the playoffs, and I started right then. And I've been doing that for 20 years now. So it's been quite a ride.
It has been. And as I said, you covered so many. Well, actually, before I go there, you've covered every major sport, but so far, like so you've done podcasting now, which is really an interview show for yourself, right? Pretty much. Play-by-play. You've done some reporting, writing, blogs and whatnot. What is there one of those that stands out as your favorite to do?
Well, I guess back in the day, play-by-play was always my favorite. Yeah. And I've still done a little bit of that here. There's a thing called the Georgia News Network or whatever, and they did the high school championship game. So I've done a few of those, but that would be my favorite. And then beyond that, I enjoy doing the reports and wrap-ups and all that. It's a bit of an art, to get in 60 seconds everything you need. plus cuts and so on. So that's a lot of fun. And like you said, you meet a lot of interesting people that way. So that's why I hang with it.
Yeah, and that's it, as I said, you get to travel to some of the great. I mean, when I was looking at your website, I mean, pretty much every major sporting event you've covered at one point or another. What's been your favorite to cover through the years as far as a major event?
Well, the World Series, of course, was fun. That was here in Atlanta. The national championship game. The college football has a certain vibe to it that some of the other sports don't. And here we're very fortunate because we have the Southeast Conference Championship every year.
Right.
And then we also have what they call the Kickoff Classic, which brings in some great teams. That's used to be sponsored by Chick-fil-A, now sponsored by Aflac. And so I get to cover all of those. I guess the Super Bowl, though, is the most taxing. Let's put it that way. And I don't know, the most dramatic, whatever. It's a lot of preparation. You have teams at two different locations. So you're running back and forth to wherever they happen to be training and doing their post-workout press conferences. There's just so much going on that week that it takes over your entire life. But at the end, it's quite rewarding because you know you've accomplished something. And they gave me an award called I forget what the name of it is. But anyway, it's the Schneider Award, Associated Press, for my work on everything, basically, but primarily covering major events. So I was very appreciative of that.
Is there any major event? I said you covered them all, but is there one that you've missed that you would like to have covered or hope to cover still?
Well, we've got the World Cup coming here, not the finals. But
Yeah,
that should be interesting. I did do one World Cup game in Chicago, and ironically, it was the day of OJ's famous ride down the highway there. But and that was, I don't know, Portugal and Ireland or somebody. So anyway, but they'll be coming back here. I don't know if there's any. Oh, I'll tell you. To me, the most dramatic event and the one with the most glitz is a heavyweight championship. Now, they're not like they used to be, unfortunately.
No.
Covered
No.
Muhammad Ali and Ingemar Johansson, or rather, yeah, that's who it was, I believe. Yeah. And it was, it's just amazing. No, it wasn't Johansson. I'm thinking of Patterson Johansson. It was Chuck Wepner and Ali. And that was the famous bout. And in fact, Sports Illustrated had a cover and he was all chewed up and they labeled it Ground Chuck. So,
yeah.
Anyway, but he almost beat Ali. I think knocked him down once, although Ali said that he stepped on his toe, that, Wepner stepped on his toe. But anyway, in the meantime, Sylvester Stallone is out in Hollywood watching.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
There you go. It's became the inspiration for the Rocky movies.
Do you think, because if I'm not mistaken, Chuck Webner spent decades suing Stallone trying to get money that he feels he's entitled to?
I don't know if he ever did. That bout was in Cleveland, of all places, and that's how I wound up doing it because I got the station to say, yeah, go ahead, cover it. And since
I feel like there was a big Ali fight in Atlanta. Maybe it was when he was coming back. Did he fight Jerry Corey in Atlanta? Maybe.
Maybe.
On his way back, after he'd been suspended and whatnot. I feel like there was a big bout in the Atlanta area. I could be wrong, though.
You're right. And Holyfield had a couple of big bouts here, too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's interesting. But that is incredible, or at least it used to be.
You're right there in your backyard, almost. How about the Masters? Have you covered the Masters?
Once, yeah. I had the opportunity. I have another guy working with me. And he's a big golf enthusiast. And I said, listen, you want to cover the Masters, fine. It involves a week going down, staying in a shabby hotel. And I just, for one thing, wasn't willing to give up all that time. The time I was there, I was able to go down for a day, cover it, go back. The most memorable thing for me, and this was in the 80s sometime, maybe late 80s. But most memorable was seeing Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus walking down. They had a practice round, and seeing them together walking down the fairway was just incredible. And that memory is will always remain there.
That's got to be just burned into your psyche. That picture.
Speaking of upstate New York, I did do at, I believe it's Oakmont in Rochester, did do a PGA championship, and that was with WIZR. And I convinced them to let me go cover this, and Nicholas, I believe, won that one. So it was interesting.
I know the Oakmont golf course very well. Went to they played the Ryder Cup out there once, and they also played the U.S. Open was there in 1988. We were out there for that. So they've had some pretty big matches out there at Oakmont. Unfortunately, each time I went, it rained, and it's a very hard course to get around and watch any golf when everything's ripped off because it's muddier than hell. But Rochester was a fun town, if I remember being out at night at that point in time.
I covered a state high school basketball tournament there in Rochester.
Yeah.
Town made it to the tournament. I don't know how they got there, but anyway, they were in. They lost the first round, but I did go up there. It's War Memorial Auditorium, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. As you, what caused you to settle in Atlanta? I know you moved to Atlanta for work, but what caused you to stay there after?
Well, I went, I met my wife here, so that was a good part of it. But it's just a very comfortable town. The nice part is it has access to the largest airport in the world, Knoxville-Jackson. So you can go anywhere without much of a problem. When I was living in Knoxville, you would always have to connect somewhere, usually through Atlanta or maybe Cincinnati. So the airport's great. Cost of living is okay. Nothing's cheap these days, but it's not bad. And, it's a friendly.
Go back to New York, Gary.
Yeah, that's right. I remember those taxes I had. I'll tell you. Yeah. Well, anyway, I like New York, but the weather was a problem for me after a while. But I grew up in Cleveland, so I was kind of used to it. But
yeah. So, and you cover a lot of the Atlanta sports scene now. For the we talked about the freelancing with AP and whatnot. Are your allegiances to the Atlanta school teams, or are you still a Cleveland fan at heart?
I'm pretty much a Cleveland fan, yeah. Although now that they're called the Guardians, the Indians are not. It's not like it was. I mean, I grew up. Rocky Colavito was the hero, and they didn't have very good teams. Only 1959 was the only really good team when I was growing up, and that was when they battled the White Sox to the end, and the Sox won, and then they went on to play the Dodgers. But I try to remain neutral down here. I'll get excited. When I was with Turner, I would get excited because Turner owned the Braves. I had to get excited, but I, as a broadcaster, you kind of have to remain neutral. I also covered back in the day, there were a lot of networks that wanted stringers, to call in scores, reports, and so on. So one time I had 4 or 5 different clients. So I was doing a lot, and I whittled that down just to Associated Press because they really picked up what they're doing. But I did Sirius XM for a while, MLB on Sirius XM, did stations in Chicago, Cleveland, WFAN in New York. But a lot of them don't, IP in Philadelphia, and they picked up the Eagles, so they no longer did their afternoon scoreboard show.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of that business has gone away, and for those who made their living doing that, that's not good. But for me, it's fine. I'm very happy with the Associated Press.
Still very busy. So in that area, not to dive into, I'm not asking you what you make or get paid. And this freelance and stringer, that's an old term, I guess. It's funny. I don't think I've heard that in a long, long time, but that's exactly what you're doing, right? You get paid only when they use your stuff, or just if you're there covering it, you're getting paid no matter what?
No, you're assigned a game. So,
Yeah.
you know, back in the old days, they had a network. AP had a regular network, and they would do like 3 or 4 hits an hour. So, but if they called you and said, you know, we want this game, you'd get paid, and you would be guaranteed to be on the air. And it's the same thing now. Now they send out a schedule of games. They give you an opportunity to turn them down if you can't make it for whatever reason. It's a nice deal. So, yeah.
So you have to pick and choose what you do right now, pretty much.
I have this guy who works with me, and that really helps too, because, you know, going to every one of the games, particularly in a season like this, and like many that the Braves have had, they are obviously a very popular team, and therefore you wind up covering almost every game. So I have to have somebody else to help me out with it. And like I said, that works out really well.
So the interviews that I've seen on your Facebook page and other places, you know, gosh, with, I don't know, Henry Aaron, I mean, everybody I can think of. There's Derek Jeter I saw pictures with, and other. Again, I'm assuming you interviewed a lot of these people at the same time. How are these coming about? Are these just you going out and going to these different events where these guys are at to get these interviews, or somebody sending you there?
No, pretty much. I take advantage of opportunities. Like I interviewed Tim Tebow. He was here for the SEC Media Days, and so I got on the list to interview him, and you know, wound up getting a real nice interview that I used on a podcast. So usually it works that way. Now, let me tell you a couple of Hank Aaron stories while we're at it.
Sure.
I worked with Hank Aaron at Turner Broadcasting. He was he had retired from baseball, obviously, and he was the vice president of something. I'm not sure what, but anyway, had an office on the 14th floor. I was on the 7th floor doing PR. And I would help Hank with some speeches now and then. And once I went along with him to the National Press Club in Washington. And it was unbelievable, the reception he received. It was just crazy. I mean, so I'm standing next to George Will, who knows, the political columnist, also wrote baseball books.
Men at Work is a great book. Yeah.
Men at Work, yep, terrific. So anyway, people are yelling and screaming and applauding for Hank, and George turns to me and he says, you know, we have kings and queens and presidents here. Nobody gets an introduction or, you know, a response like Hank Aaron. And that said a lot. It was unbelievable. So
it's good.
I had a chance to play racquetball with Hank once. He killed me, basically. And so we never played again, but it was an experience.
You should have waited till he got older. Maybe you would have had a chance.
Yeah.
Right?
Still had the wrists. That was the thing that was brutal. I mean, his wrists were so quick that.
You know, it's funny, and I'm gonna talk to you anyway about the change in sports from when you started to now, and I'll start that segue with this. You know, baseball is so wrapped up in exit velocities and, you know, launch angles. You know, I'll bet you Hank Aaron's exit velocity was nothing that we'd get excited about today. And a lot of his home runs just cleared the fences, but that's all that matters.
Right. I 715 just cleared the fence. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of his, I remember, he wasn't hitting 500-foot home runs, 480-foot home runs. He was hitting them as far as he had to hit them. And it was all, those wrists were amazing to watch him, you know.
And he rarely got over 40 home runs. His secret was consistency.
Yeah.
That's how he compiled all those numbers.
What are your thoughts on the games? I mean, it was a game. I still try to separate the business from the game as much as I can, right? It's hard. It's getting harder.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you feel there's as much sports? I guess the best way I can ask this, is there as much sports in sports as there was 50 years ago? Are the games still, you feel the same way watching a game?
Well, I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, number one, you're looking at, like, when I'm thinking of the Indians, I'm looking at it through the prism of a kid or, you know, like a young adult, whatever. I think some things have changed, but basically the game on the field is still pretty good. And particularly, I think in football, where there have been so many, college football, where there have been so many drastic changes, the portals, you name it. I mean, they just changed it totally off the field. But when it comes to Saturday afternoon, you still have probably the greatest entertainment you could possibly want with some of these games.
Yeah, I wrote down when you mentioned this phrase, college football vibe, right? And I wanted to get back to this point. I've talked and I've railed a lot on the shows that I do. They're more commentary driven about the changes off the field, the NIL, the amateurism basically being a thing of the past, right? In college sports and college football. But as long as Saturdays, and I've said this, I've now come to accept it. I don't have a time machine where I can go back to 1980. I haven't been able to yet. So I got to accept those realities. And as long as Saturday still feels like Saturday, the energy's still there, because I always argue with people. I love the NFL. I really do. But the energy level, the excitement level in the stadiums are so much different on Saturday than Sundays.
Absolutely.
You're going to be able to speak to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, when you go to a Falcons game, they may get excited occasionally. Of course, we haven't had much of a team to work with in the past few years, but, and the stadiums aren't always full. There's, at least in Atlanta, they haven't been filled in the past few years. If they do well this year, it'll probably get better. But even then, they score a touchdown, you hear cheering and so on. At a college game, I mean, that roar is almost constant. I mean, there's just so much enthusiasm, and it's more of a tribal sport too, I guess, which makes a difference.
Yeah, so. Right. It's the roar, it's the band, it's all of that, right? And so far this year, this has been my litmus test. If I feel that excitement, I still feel it. It's still there, and I hope it stays that way. I mean, because to me, I don't want to see it get totally stuck up in the money aspect of this, for sure. So
right, absolutely.
You mentioned the Falcons. Did you cover their Super Bowl games?
Right.
Did you cover both Super Bowls the Falcons were in? Or no?
I actually covered more that they weren't in than they were in.
Oh.
Back in the day, the three I've covered were all here in Atlanta. One was with the Buffalo Bills. I can't remember the second one. Third one was obviously with the Los Angeles Rams a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That was, it was actually a pretty dull game, but like I said, the excitement of an event that is just overwhelming.
I was asking about the Falcons specifically because I wanted to get to, if I could find my way to 28-3. I'm a Patriot fan, so it's one of my favorite Sundays. I've had some bad Sundays, but mostly good ones in Super Bowl Sunday.
No one will ever forget that, at least in Atlanta.
I was on a cruise ship, and it was either Falcon fans or Patriot haters, and then my little group of about 5. It was ugly for a long time, and people were in my face, but I was sat calmly and waited. It was a lot of fun.
We have a group in Atlanta called the Touchdown Club.
Yeah,
and Matt Ryan was the speaker. And he kind of ignored that 28-3, or said it was just, things like that happen in sports.
Well,
I asked him to be on a podcast too, and I tried to follow up with him. Have not heard back yet, but I'm hoping to get him one of these days. He's obviously now very busy doing television.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if you'd had him for an interview, because I remember him when he was at Boston College. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine from Amsterdam, Josh Beekman, his son was an offensive lineman the entire time Matt was there. In fact, he got drafted by the Bears, I think, in the 3rd round, if I remember, and had a short NFL career, nothing like Matt's. But he was a good kid, and we used to sit with his dad, and his dad was quite a character for sure. And I never saw, he was a good college quarterback, but I never foresaw what was going to come for him in the NFL.
I know. He was terrific. He, of course, got into that one Super Bowl, but what can you say?
That happens. Who's your best interview that you've done, Gary? Who'd you enjoy the most?
Oh, boy. I enjoyed Tebow a lot. I enjoyed Jim Kelly, the old Buffalo Bills quarterback.
Yesterday, actually, yeah.
Yeah, he has a great story to tell about he had his cancer and all that. And he's, I asked him about losing those 4 straight Super Bowls. And he was, he said, listen, nobody can ever complain about being in 4 Super Bowls. I mean, we still accomplished a lot. And, he was very much like, everybody's feeling sorry for them because they never won. He said, doesn't bother me. I mean, to get to 4 is really something. So anyway, but yeah, he was good. And oh gosh, there's just been tons of the Frenchie, Jeff Francoeur. I've had him on the podcast a couple of times. Hope to get him back. He's now doing network TV on, I believe it's TBS, working with Brian Anderson and Bob Costas.
Yeah.
So, and I've had, I interview a guy named Terrence Moore, who's a writer here in Atlanta, and he's full of stories. He worked for the San Francisco Examiner, Cincinnati Enquirer, Atlanta Journal, and now he works for Forbes.com. So he's got a million stories. So it's the guys with the stories that are, the best interviews.
Who was the toughest interview for whatever reason? It just kind of didn't click.
How about A-Rod?
Yeah, imagine.
He was not particularly gracious. I remember in the locker room after a game with the Yankees, I talked to Jeter and A-Rod, and Jeter was very nice. In fact, I met him again at a fundraiser last year and had a nice chat with him. But he was always gracious, even in the locker room when everybody's anxious to leave and all that. A-Rod was just a sour apple. I mean, he was not willing to give you more than 2 words, and that was it.
That's why he feels so disingenuous. I hear stories like that, and then he goes on TV and he seems like the most, outgoing and approachable person in the world, which never feels genuine, right?
That's right. You never know. And he turned his on for TV, I guess.
Well, Gary, before we wrap it up here this morning, and I do appreciate your time a lot. I mean, if somebody was trying to get started, and again, the world's a lot different 50 years later. If somebody was trying to get started in the world of play-by-play like you did as a young man at WIZR, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities to do things associated with sports. If you're in college, you can go down to the sports information office and try to do something, no matter what it is. And if you show you have perhaps some ability to work on the air, what the heck, maybe they'll pick you up. Steve Holman, who's the broadcaster for the Atlanta Hawks, he got his start he worked at a small radio station in Massachusetts, which was owned by Kurt Gowdy, which is fine. But as a result of that, he got a press pass to the Boston Celtics games. And he wound up getting coffee for Johnny Motes, who's the famous play-by-play announcer for the Celts. And he would, get him his cigarettes and coffee and all that. And one day, because of his smoking habit, Johnny couldn't perform. So Steve stepped in, and that's how he got his break.
That's interesting.
So if you're around it, that's the important thing. The other thing is internships when you're in college, particularly. Anytime you can intern with a radio station, TV station, no matter what it is, do it, because things can happen. You never know. It's a crazy business, as you know. It's just wild.
Well, you've had quite a ride, as I said, from the Glove City Colonials and high school basketball in Johnstown, New York, to covering every major sporting event, as we talked about before. You've had a great ride. I'm sure you've enjoyed every minute of it. And I've enjoyed every minute of chat with you today and indulging me so we could go back in time a little bit to that little small town, one of the smallest places you probably worked. So I appreciate your time.
Terrific. Thank you. It's great to be here.
And everybody, I'll be back at 3:00 today. I want to thank everybody for watching. Everybody who'll watch this later when we share it to the groups and whatnot. Check out Gary. Gary, where can they catch your podcast, by the way, before I let you
Podcast is called Sports Across the Board. It's available on Apple, Audacity, you name it, any of the typical podcast sites. So
there you go.
Across the board.
Check out Gary McKillips Great guest today. Thank you, Gary, for your time. Thank everyone for watching. Everybody catches it later. I'll see you later with the MLB update and Sunday with the Sunday streaming cast. This is Keith Engle, one-on-one with Keith Engle. Have a great Friday. Bye-bye, guys.
You're listening to Keith Engle, the host of TGI Sports Talk on the National Streaming Sports